Okay, to solve a absolute value inequality, first you want to isolate the shed. So here's my shed. It's the stuff inside of your absolute value bars. Anything that's not in your absolute value bars, you need to get rid of. So I need to get rid of this 3. So I'm going to subtract 3, because what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. After that, I'm left with the absolute value of 2x plus 4 is greater than or equal to 15 minus 3, which is 12. Once you have successfully isolated your shed, you can write 2 equations. The first equation is your keep equation. You're going to keep everything the same. The only thing you're going to get rid of are these absolute value bars. So you're going to be left with 2x plus 4 is greater than or equal to 12. The other side is going to be your change side. If you remember, the change side is the side where the tornado comes along and flips everything upside down. The only thing that's safe is what's inside of your shed. The shed protects what's inside. So your 2x plus 4 don't change because they're in the shed. But this inequality sign right here is going to change to a less than or equal to sign, and this 12 is going to change to a negative 12. From here, you just have 2 normal equations that you have to solve. If I'm going to solve for x right here, I need to get rid of its friends first, which is this 4, and then I can get rid of the family. So first I'm going to get rid of this 4 by subtracting 4. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. And then I'm left with 2x is greater than or equal to 8. And then finally I'm going to get rid of his family by dividing by 2. And I'm left with x is greater than or equal to 4. I'm going to follow the same process on this side. But this time I'm going to get negative 16 because negative minus more, basically more negative, it's going to be a negative 16. Get rid of the 2 by dividing, and you end up with x is less than or equal to negative 8. Now, unfortunately, I'm not done. Once I find what x equals, or what x, when I have my final inequality here, I'm going to take those 2 numbers and put them onto a number line. So let me move this up. Here I have my negative 8. Here's 0. And here's 4. Whenever I'm putting these onto my number line, I'm going to make sure to use a closed circle because my original inequality has a line under it right here. So I'm going to put a closed circle on the 2 points, 4 and negative 8. Then I'm going to look at my inequality. Here I have x is greater than 4. So whenever I am shading, I'm going to shade to the right of 4 because x is greater than, the numbers are greater than 4 on this side of the 4. Okay, on this side, on this inequality, I have x is less than negative 8. So I'm going to shade to the left of negative 8 because all the numbers get smaller as you go in that direction. And as you can see, I have now shaded on the outside of my 2 points. If you'll remember, outside means you're going to use the word or in your answer. And so your final answer is x is greater than or equal to 4, or x is less than or equal to negative 8. All right, let's talk about how to solve this quadratic inequality. When you are solving a quadratic, you know that it has to equal 0 before you can do anything else. So before you even start, you see that it's a quadratic because it has an x squared, and so your first instinct should be to set it equal to 0, which means you need to get rid of all the stuff on this side. When you're getting rid of all that stuff, you're going to subtract 7x and add x. That's going to cancel both of those terms. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other side of your inequality. And so you're going to line up your x squared term underneath your x squared term. So you're going to say minus 7x under your 8x squared. Sorry, I said an x squared. And you're going to say plus x underneath your x term. There's nothing to line up under the 18, so you leave it alone. 8x squared minus 7x squared is 1x squared. Remember, 1 in front of any type of letter or variable is always optional, so I'm going to take that away. 2 plus 1x is 3x. 18 doesn't have anything to combine, so you just bring it down. And you're left with all of that less than 0 because all your terms up here canceled. Once you have something equal to 0, you can set about solving your quadratic in one of many different types of ways that we've covered in class. One way you might try is by factoring. Another way could be using the quadratic formula. A third way we talked about, but is not something we really focused on, is completing the square. I wouldn't use that if you're not comfortable with it. There were some other ways we discussed, but those were the main ones. Right here, I am going to use factoring first. I'll do that in blue, and then I'll talk about the quadratic formula in case you need to use the quadratic formula. So if I'm going to factor this, I'm going to start by looking at our last term here, this negative 18. I'm going to think, what can I multiply to get negative 18 that adds to this middle term of 3? And so you might think, okay, I can multiply 9 and 2 to get 18, but no matter if I put the negative on this 9 or if I put it on this 2, it's never going to give me a positive 3. And so maybe instead of 9 and 2, you can think about 6 and 3. And sure enough, if I put a negative sign in front of this 3, I will be able to get this positive 3 that I'm looking for if I add 6 minus 3. So I'm going to move forward with those two numbers. When you're factoring, you're going to put x and x into two parentheses. Then you're going to put these numbers after them. I have a positive 6 and a negative 3. Now, to continue solving a quadratic with the inequality attached actually makes the problem more difficult. So it's actually easier to change this to an equal sign, solve for x, and then deal with the inequality at the end of the problem. So here I'm going to change it to an equal sign just for ease of solving. After this, if you'll remember, everything inside your parentheses is going to end up being positive. When you solve these for x, you're going to get x equals negative 6 and x equals positive 3. So you basically just flipped the signs here. Once you've gotten these two numbers, you're going to put them on a number line. Here's negative 6, here's 0, and here is 3. This time, when I'm putting them onto my number line, if you'll see, my inequality does not have any type of line underneath it. And so when I'm putting these numbers on my number line, I am going to use an open circle that's not colored in. So I'm going to put my first open circle on the 6, the second one on the 3, and then I'm going to set about figuring out where to shade. So now I'm going to come back and deal with my inequality by figuring out where to shade. To do that, you're actually going to look at your original inequality. So I'm going to erase all this stuff so we can see it easier. What I want to do is I want to take this 0 and test this 0 to see if this middle section is true or if it's false. So I'm going to take 0 and plug it into every single x in my inequality. When I replace this x with 0, and this x with 0, and this x with 0, and this x with 0, this 8 multiplied by this 0 squared turns this whole term into a 0. 2 times 0 is 0. It turns it into 0 and it goes away. 7 times 0 is 0. It goes away. X 0 goes away. So this whole side ends up being 0. And this whole side ends up being negative 18. And so now we're going to look at this inequality that we have, and we're going to think, is negative 18 actually less than 0? Is this inequality true? And you think, yes, of course, negative 18 is less than 0. And so when I come back down here, I know that this middle section where I find the 0 has to be true. And so I'm going to shade my middle section. And I know the pattern is always false, true, false, or true, false, true, because of the shape of the graph. And so I know that the outsides have to be false. And so when I'm writing my answer, I will be able to tell you that x is greater than negative 6 because I shaded to the right of negative 6. So I have x is greater than negative 6 and x is less than 3. But remember, when you shade in between your 2 points, most likely the answer choices you're going to be given on a test are not going to be given in this format. They are going to write it with x between 2 points, like so. So when you're writing your answer, you're going to want to write x with 2 inequalities facing left, with your small number on the left and your big number on the right. This is the most efficient way of writing your answer to this inequality, with x in between your 2 points. Okay, but let's say instead of factoring, you chose to use the quadratic formula. You would still end up with the same answers, so I'm actually not going to erase anything below my answers, but I will walk you through the quadratic formula just in case we forgot how to do it. So, if you'll remember, when I'm using the quadratic formula, I'm interested in my a value, my b value, and my c value, where a is the number next to your x squared, right here. Remember, that's just a 1. B is the number next to your x, and c is the number all by itself. So for this one, I have a is 1, b is 3, and c is negative 18. From there, you're going to grab your formula chart and find the quadratic formula. And you'll see on the formula chart this equation. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And this formula tells you exactly where to plug in all of these numbers right here. So when I plug that in, I'm going to get negative b, which is negative 3, plus or minus the square root of b, which is 3, squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 18, all over 2 times a, which is 1. From here, you could simplify this by hand, or you could type all of these numbers in the calculator, and the calculator can help you out. Just remember, when you're doing this, one of the times you're calculating this out, you're going to need to use a plus sign in this location, and the second time you do it, you're going to need to use a minus sign right there. And what you're going to get is x equals negative 6 and x equals 3, which were the numbers that we had gotten before by factoring. From there, you would use these numbers, put them on the number line, test 0 to figure out where is true, and then write your answer. The exact same process that we followed after we got these answers by factoring.